Hello, welcome to the Infidelity Stories channel, a place where we delve into true narratives filled with surprising turns. If you found the video enjoyable, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. It truly supports the growth of our channel. Now, let's immerse ourselves in the narrative. Nearly 3 years have passed since I lost Sarah. At times, it seems as though it happened just yesterday, while at other moments, it feels like an eternity has passed. She left this world while bringing new life into it, leaving me with 2 beautiful boys and a heart that feels profoundly empty. The ache of that day, of losing her, lingers endlessly. Each time I gaze at my sons, that familiar sting resurfaces. They never had the chance to truly know their mother. She vanished before they had the chance to awaken. Initially, it was simply the 3 of us, myself and my 2 young ones. The house loomed large and silent in her absence. I needed to find a way to balance it all: work, caring for the kids, managing the laundry, and preparing meals. There were days when it seemed I was just managing to keep everything from falling apart. There wasn't an opportunity for me to mourn in the way I needed. I found myself with no time to spare, solely focused on pushing ahead for their benefit. Yet, despite my efforts to remain resilient, I sensed the cracks forming within me. Support from family was invaluable. My parents visited frequently, and so did Sarah's, particularly at the start. However, over time, the relentless demand for assistance started to take its toll on them, and I noticed their fatigue. I was as well. It lacked sustainability. I had considered the possibility of hiring a nanny previously, but the thought of introducing a stranger into my home, someone unfamiliar who might not share my level of care for my children, was daunting. I was selective about who could watch my boys. I sought an individual who embodied responsibility, who exuded trustworthiness, and who would bestow upon them the love and care they truly deserved. After months of contemplation, I ultimately concluded that the moment had arrived. I sought assistance, both for my own well-being and for theirs. I shared an advertisement and began exploring various profiles. After some time, I finally located Margaret. At 32, she possessed an impressive array of endorsements. She possessed experience in working with children, despite not having any of her own. She appeared earnest, dedicated, and compassionate. Following several interviews and a trial phase, I decided to bring her on board. To be honest, I had my doubts about whether this would succeed. Welcoming someone into our home was a significant moment. Yet Margaret was a refreshing presence. She exuded warmth, displayed remarkable patience, and embodied understanding. It was clear that she had a deep affection for the boys. They were drawn to her right away. It wasn't merely the manner in which she addressed them. It was the manner in which she absorbed their words, the depth of her comprehension of their desires. Their affection for her was unmistakable. Honestly, it provided a sense of reassurance, as if I was making the right choice by welcoming her in. During the initial year, all proceeded without a hitch. Margaret joined the household. I truly valued her support with the children and the way she allowed me the freedom to concentrate on my work. Yet, I began to observe a certain something, an undeniable presence that demanded my attention. Initially, it was understated. Subtle glimpses, extended stares, caresses that seemed to carry a weight beyond their intention. I couldn't refuse to acknowledge it. There was a spark between us. I sensed it, despite my efforts to overlook it. I felt unprepared for any new experiences, especially after losing Sarah. Yet, there was an undeniable quality about Margaret. She possessed a unique ability to make me feel acknowledged, comprehended. Perhaps it was the manner in which she looked after my children. Or perhaps it was the manner in which she addressed me, as though she truly had an interest in my well-being. I dismissed it for some time, convincing myself that it was merely the voice of solitude speaking. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood that the bond was genuine. And that was the moment when everything began to shift. It's curious how emotions can sneak up on you at the most unexpected moments. For an extended period, I endeavored to suppress any thoughts of Margaret beneath the surface. She was merely a caregiver, just someone assisting me with the children. As time went on, I became increasingly aware of how much I anticipated her presence each day. I often reassured myself that it was merely appreciation, simply gratitude for her presence in my life. Yet, I understood it went deeper than that. There were subtle instances, such as when she flashed a smile my way, or when our gazes lingered just a bit longer than usual. It struck me how she would chuckle at my jokes, even the silly ones. I didn't believe she was being flirtatious with me. There was an undeniable bond. And the more I attempted to assure myself it was insignificant, the more I came to understand how eagerly I anticipated her presence. The pivotal moment arrived during one of those serene evenings when the children had drifted off to sleep. As I tidied up the kitchen after dinner, Margaret entered to lend a hand. We stood together, bathed in the gentle illumination of the kitchen light. She carefully dried the dishes while I methodically put them away. It felt cozy, as if we had found our way into a silent harmony. However, she took an unexpected turn. As she extended her hand to offer me a plate, our fingers lightly grazed against each other. In that fleeting instant, something within me stirred. My heart raced with a hint of excitement. I was at a loss regarding how to handle that. For a fleeting instant, I stood still, acutely aware of her gaze upon me. It was a deliberate gaze. It was intentional. She gazed at me, as if anticipating my words to recognize the significance of the moment. However, I remained silent. I was unable to. I was unprepared. Instead, I hurriedly mumbled something about needing to wrap things up, eager to move past the moment. Yet, even after she exited the kitchen, I sensed that my heartbeat remained rapid. What was that all about? Could it have been merely a coincidence, an error? Or could there be something deeper? Reluctantly, I acknowledged the truth within me. It truly happened. The following days were filled with tension. I believed they were, at the very least. Each time I encountered Margaret, her presence struck me with a profound intensity. Our exchanges seemed increasingly tense, as if we were both making an effort to sidestep the reality of what had transpired. She appeared to be perfectly okay, as if nothing had changed. Yet, an unsettling sensation lingered within me, as if a shift had occurred. I discovered that I was seeking reasons to engage with her, to be close to her. I realized it was foolish, without a doubt. I had 2 children, and she worked for me. Nothing could exist between us. However, the harder I attempted to persuade myself of that, the more it seemed as though I was deceiving myself. It was that evening when I returned home late after a meeting. The children had drifted off to sleep, while Margaret wrapped up her paperwork at the kitchen table. I entered, weary yet attempting to maintain a cheerful demeanor. She glanced upward and beamed, and in that instant, I perceived it. The identical gaze she cast my way when our fingers met. It lingered quietly, yet it was undeniable, and this time, I found myself unable to overlook it. I lingered for a moment, at a loss for words. A palpable tension lingered in the air, a silent understanding woven between us. It felt as if we were both anticipating an unspoken moment. My heart raced once more, yet I stood my ground this time. Instead, I approached the table, and for the first time, I permitted myself to see her, not merely as a caregiver, not just as someone providing assistance, but as a woman. We chatted briefly about the children and the day's events. As I stood to depart, her words struck a chord, causing my heart to momentarily falter. "You know, George," she started, pausing for a moment, "I'm truly happy that we crossed paths. I understand my role is to assist with the boys, but I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude for all that you've done for me." Her words lingered in the atmosphere, and I sensed my heartbeat racing once more. Her words carried a heaviness, an implicit meaning that eluded my understanding, yet I sensed it deeply. I found myself at a loss for words, so I simply nodded, wary of saying anything that might come off as too bold or create an uncomfortable atmosphere. As I exited the kitchen that night, an unsettling sensation lingered, suggesting that Margaret had merely embarked on her journey. She had taken a risk, even if it was a minor one, and that filled me with apprehension, as I was uncertain of the consequences that would follow if I recognized it. If I were to confess that, perhaps, just perhaps, I shared those feelings. The subsequent days unfolded in a peculiar state of suspension. Margaret and I never addressed that moment in the kitchen, our hands grazing, her gentle words hanging in the atmosphere. It felt like we were both acting as if it never occurred, yet the tension was palpable each time she walked into the room. It wasn't solely her, I was involved as well. I found myself at a loss for how to respond. I had always held her in high regard as a professional, someone who was assisting me in raising my children, but now the situation felt altered. I reassured myself that it was insignificant. She was merely showing kindness, simply being courteous. Yet, each time she smiled at me, or when our gazes lingered for just a moment too long, it seemed to hint at something more profound. I often found my thoughts drifting to her in her absence. At times, I catch myself pondering how life might unfold if circumstances were altered. If I weren't responsible for two little ones. If she weren't my caregiver. However, I swiftly set those thoughts aside. They found themselves without a place. Distractions were simply not an option for me. After losing Claire, my wife, I found myself enveloped in grief for what felt like an eternity, making the idea of allowing someone into my heart again seem utterly unattainable. And yet, each time I encountered Margaret, I found myself pondering. She exuded warmth, thoughtfulness, and an undeniable allure. I had been observing it increasingly in recent times. Her demeanor was striking. Her ability to manage everything with such grace and ease was truly remarkable. She was more than a nanny. She was a woman who appeared to have a clear vision of her desires and the means to achieve them. In some inexplicable way, she brought me into focus. Not merely in the roles of a father or a widower, but as an individual. On a Wednesday night, roughly 2 weeks after that incident in the kitchen, the atmosphere began to change. The children had settled into their beds, and Margaret was wrapping up her customary task of putting things in order. As I sat in the living room, scrolling through work emails on my phone, her voice drifted in from the hallway. "George, could you spare a moment?" She called, her tone relaxed, yet laced with an undercurrent of deeper emotion. I cast a fleeting look at the clock. The clock was nearing the hour of 10 in the evening. To my surprise, she was still there. I gave a nod and stood up. I made my way down the hallway, where she stood by the stairs. A peculiar hush enveloped the atmosphere. Her gaze was fixed on me with a fervor that was truly unprecedented. The relaxed tone of her request sharply contrasted with the underlying tension that existed between us. "Of course, what's on your mind?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a casual demeanor, yet my voice came out heavy, as if the burden of all that remained unspoken was bearing down on me. "I just wanted to check in on you," she said, her gaze becoming gentle. "You've seemed somewhat removed recently. I understand where you're coming from. I know you're swamped and things have been overwhelming, but I wanted to check in and see how you're holding up." Her words took me by surprise. I was unaware that I had been distancing myself. Perhaps it stemmed from my effort to maintain control over my feelings, to avoid allowing my mind to wander beyond the immediate reality before me. Navigating parenthood and life in the absence of Claire. However, I hadn't recognized that I could be isolating myself from the individual who had turned into my pillar of support. "I'm okay," I replied, though deep down I recognized the truth of my deception. I was not okay. I hadn't felt okay in ages, yet I struggled to find the words to convey that to her. I found it difficult to express that I'm feeling scared, or that I'm uncertain about how to handle these emotions I have for you. She nodded as if she grasped the situation, yet chose not to inquire further. Instead, she moved a bit nearer, her voice softening to a more personal, intimate cadence. "I understand, George," she said, "you've faced many challenges, and I'm not here to add to your burdens. I'm at a loss, honestly. You truly deserve to find joy once more." Her words struck me with an intensity one hadn't anticipated. She was delving deeper, beyond just the kids or her job. She was discussing me. She spoke of the man I used to be, the individual I believed I had lost when Claire left this world. It was unusual to hear someone articulate it so directly, yet it seemed as though she recognized something within me that I had lost sight of for quite some time. I hesitated, confessing my uncertainty as the truth finally emerged. It's simply challenging. I'm in the process of discovering my path. She smiled softly, her gaze intertwining with mine, radiating a warmth that was distinct from the typical friendly look. It felt like she was anticipating me to elaborate further. However, I chose not to. I was unable to. There was an overwhelming sense of trepidation, a dread of the implications, a worry about the consequences of allowing myself to venture into that territory. Margaret paused for a moment, her expression gentle and empathetic as she offered a soft smile. "You don't need to solve everything right now," she said. "I want you to know that I'm available if you ever feel like talking or if you reconsider your decision." In an instant, she pivoted and made her way back down the corridor. I lingered in that moment, her words reverberating through my thoughts. She was indeed correct. I wasn't required to solve it this evening. Yet, I couldn't overlook the undeniable change that had occurred between us. Perhaps it was finally time to cease the charade of ignoring its presence. The days following that night seemed to spin in a chaotic dance. Margaret and I carried on with our familiar habits. As I attempt to maintain my distance, she carries on as if everything remains the same. However, it indeed had. The stillness that enveloped us transcended mere lack of speech. The burden of all that remained unsaid hung heavily in the air. Her words lingered in my mind, refusing to fade away. "Happiness is within your reach once more." It lingered in my mind. It seemed to echo a memory of something just beyond my grasp. The children remained blissfully unaware, much to my relief. They cherished Margaret and embraced her as if she were one of their own. Yet, there was an unmistakable shift within me each time I laid eyes on her. It wasn't merely the compassion I held for her, nor was it solely the appreciation I experienced for her assistance in nurturing my children. It was greater. It was desire. It was an emotion I hadn't experienced in ages, leaving me unsure of how to navigate it. Coming to terms with it was a challenge, both internally and in sharing it with others. Yet, as time passed, the space I attempted to create between us only deepened the divide. Each moment I observed Margaret engaging with the children, each time her laughter rang out or her smile brightened the room, I experienced an inexplicable attraction. It was more than mere attraction, however. A deep yearning filled the air. I came to understand that perhaps it wasn't merely companionship I was longing for. I longed for the sensation of being acknowledged. And Margaret accomplished that for me. She made me feel like I was more than just the grieving widower or the single dad trying to hold it all together. She caught sight of me. The man I had nearly erased from my memory. It was during a late-night dinner that I finally reached my breaking point. The children had drifted off, leaving the home enveloped in stillness. Margaret and I sat facing one another at the kitchen table, the soft light enveloping the space in a cozy ambience. I attempted to concentrate on the meal, striving to overlook the tension, yet it eluded me. Thoughts of her lingered in my mind, pulling me back time and again. "Margaret." I started, my voice softer than I had meant it to be. I took a moment, contemplating how to articulate the thoughts that had been swirling in my mind for weeks. She glanced up from her plate, offering me her familiar, inviting smile. "It's time for a conversation." Her expression shifted subtly, as if she was bracing for something significant. "All right," she murmured gently, placing her fork aside and focusing entirely on me. I inhaled deeply, attempting to soothe my whirlwind of thoughts. I held myself back. What was my explanation for this? How did I express myself without coming across as overly analytical, or even worse, as if I was giving her false hope? "Margaret." I began anew, with a greater sense of determination. "I've been reflecting on our conversation from the other night. On the subject of joy." She nodded, her eyes fixed intently on me. She remained silent, patiently allowing me to carry on. I suppose I've been restraining myself. I've been so consumed by what transpired with Claire and the challenges with the kids that I never imagined I could allow myself to be vulnerable again. Yet, I cannot overlook the emotions that arise in your presence. It's more than simply assisting with the children. It transcends the ordinary. A sensation that has eluded me for quite some time. Her gaze became gentle, yet words eluded her. It felt as though she was allowing me to express all my thoughts freely, without any expectation for perfection in my words. I'm not claiming I'm prepared for anything. I simply cannot act as if it doesn't have an impact on me. What lies between us? I held back once more, becoming aware of the unrefined nature of my expressions. How much I had been keeping inside. She fell silent for a moment, and I sensed her mind sifting through it all. I lingered, my heart racing within me, experiencing a level of vulnerability I hadn't felt in ages. At last, Margaret began to speak, her tone gentle yet unwavering. "George, I'm not expecting you to prepare for anything. I simply wanted to convey that my presence is with you. I'm here to stay, and you mean a lot to me. Your well-being and that of the children is important to me. I truly believe you are worthy of happiness. If that signifies a deeper connection between us, then I am receptive to the idea. However, it must be when you feel prepared." Her words struck me with an intensity one hadn't anticipated. It was one thing for me to experience a particular emotion, but when I heard her express that she cared, that she was prepared to wait for me, it broke something within me. The sorrow, the barriers I had constructed, suddenly felt less significant. I gazed at her then, truly gazed at her, and for the first time in ages, I permitted myself to perceive what lay before me. Not merely the caretaker, but a woman who was presenting me with something I hadn't realized I was missing. I'm uncertain about my readiness. I spoke with sincerity, my voice heavy with feeling, yet I am eager to make an attempt. I'm curious to explore the possibilities ahead. Together with you. If you remain open to offering me that opportunity. Margaret smiled softly, her gaze brimming with empathy. "Absolutely," she replied. "Take your time, George, whenever you feel prepared." And just like that, a shift occurred in our connection. The atmosphere was imbued with a sense of liberation, as if a weight had been effortlessly removed. I lacked all the answers. Uncertainty loomed over me, leaving me in suspense about what was to come. For the first time in years, I sensed the possibility of a future that wasn't shaped by loss and grief. Perhaps, just perhaps, an opportunity for something fresh awaited. The days that came after that talk with Margaret felt like a haze. It wasn't that everything had suddenly become flawless, or that all my anxieties had vanished, but I sensed a change, as if I was finally permitting myself to contemplate something beyond the sorrow that had enveloped me for such an extended period. For years, it seemed as though time had come to a standstill following Claire's death, leaving me trapped in that suspended instant. Yet, through Margaret's words and her patient understanding, I came to the realization that perhaps it was time to progress. Perhaps it was time to embrace the chance of finding joy once more. In the months that followed, a gradual transformation began to unfold. Margaret never forced me, yet her presence was a constant in my life. Each day, she offered her support with the kids, subtly reminding me of her genuine concern. We shared serene evenings once the children were tucked in, engaging in conversation, sharing laughter, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was straightforward, yet significant. Each fleeting moment shared with her felt like a thread weaving us tighter together, yet it was on a particular Saturday afternoon that I truly understood the depth of my reliance on her, the extent of my need for her presence. A small family trip to the lake with the kids had been on my mind for a while. A simple weekend escape to break free from the everyday grind and savor some quality time together. Margaret remained uncertain about attending. She was cautious, mindful of boundaries, and eager to avoid any discomfort. Yet, I remained resolute. "You're one of us now," I said to her, and I truly meant it. She had woven herself into the fabric of our lives, and the kids adored her. She transcended the role of a nanny, she became a friend and a pillar of support. I longed for her presence among us, to partake in these cherished moments. Our weekend was blissfully spent by the serene lake. It was stunning, serene, a refuge from the pressures of daily existence. The children were filled with joy, darting about and giggling merrily. Margaret and I enjoyed a serene moment by the water, simply observing them as they played. I had never experienced such a profound sense of satisfaction. Our words were few, yet her presence brought a sense of solace that was undeniable. It felt as though we were crafting something collaboratively, something fresh and unforeseen. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, we found ourselves on the porch, enjoying chilled beverages while observing the children winding down for the night. Now, it was only the two of us, and the silence that enveloped us carried a new weight. It had lost its awkwardness. It felt cozy, like an old friend. "George," Margaret whispered softly, shattering the stillness. "I have been contemplating." I glanced at her, feeling the weight of her tone. By this point, I had become familiar enough with her to sense when she was about to share something significant. "I understand we've been moving at a measured pace, and I have no desire to hasten anything," she continued. "However, I want you to understand that I am fully committed. I'm here for you, for the children, for it all. If you're prepared to move forward, I'm here for you." Her words lingered in the atmosphere for a brief pause, and I came to a realization. I had been anticipating the ideal moment, seeking the perfect opportunity to reach a conclusion. Yet, the ideal moment never arrived. Life never paused for the perfect moment to decide. One simply had to embrace the jump, despite the fear it might bring. I gazed at her, truly gazed at her. The woman who stood by my side, who assisted me in mending the fragments of my shattered existence, who nurtured my children as if they were her own. I came to understand that the apprehension I experienced about progressing was insignificant when weighed against the affection and bond one shared with her. "I am prepared," I declared, my tone unwavering yet brimming with feeling. "I am prepared, Margaret." Her smile blossomed, a wave of relief and joy illuminating her features. I extended my hand toward hers, and we lingered in the stillness, locked in each other's eyes. It lacked the flair of a grand declaration or the impact of a dramatic gesture, yet it encompassed all we required in that moment. It was genuine, it was sincere. In the months that followed, everything began to align perfectly. Margaret and I found ourselves growing closer, our bond becoming more profound. The children were more joyful than they had ever been. It was evident that Margaret held a significance beyond that of a mere caregiver to them. She was kin. One evening, as I gathered the kids around to share the exciting news of our upcoming adventure, a grander trip to the beach, I felt a change within me. It was more than merely progressing. This was a moment to formalize the new chapter, a commitment to her, to myself, and to the children. I had come to understand that my connection with Margaret was more than a mere fling or a fleeting moment. It was the genuine article. That evening, once the children were tucked in, I settled in with Margaret. We engaged in a lengthy conversation about what lies ahead, discussing our aspirations and dreams. In that moment, I let go of any hesitation, inhaled deeply, and simply asked her, "Margaret, will you marry me?" I inquired, my voice heavy with feeling. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she gave a subtle nod. "Indeed, George, indeed." In that instant, I realized that every ounce of pain and heartbreak I had endured had brought me to this very moment, to this woman who had mended parts of me I believed were irreparable, and to a future that was finally brimming with hope. We didn't require elaborate displays or flawless moments. What truly counted was that we discovered one another at a time when we were both prepared to take the next step, and that alone was sufficient.